Good morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church. It's great to see you here. If you're visiting for the first time, you are our honored guest, and we are especially glad that you're here. We invite everyone to join us after worship in Elliott Hall. New folks, we would love to get to know you and introduce our church to you as well. Welcome to those of us joining online. We're glad you're here. I have a few announcements as we get started. First, I hope you will stay. Immediately after this worship service, we're going to be trimming the tree, putting some beautiful ornaments, making some ornaments, hanging the greens, and otherwise getting ready for the holiday season. So we'll hope that you'll all stay and join in the fun. If you are interested in helping out with our solstice celebration, which will be on the 21st of this month, please reach out to Amanda Esko. She's our Director of Religious Education, and she's wrangling the cats on that one. So she would love to have your help. And we'd love for all of you to join us. It's going to be an outdoor celebration with lots of fun things to do for all people of all ages. Another tradition that we have here is by financially supporting our sibling congregation at San Esteban in West Valley City. You can donate to help make their holidays a little bit merrier. You can do it on our website. You can use the QR code that's in the seat back in front of you, or you can talk to Stephanie in the office, and she can help you find out how to do that. There is a new opportunity for adult religious education. This is a monthly book club facilitated by myself and Reverend Laura at our congregation in Cottonwood Heights, South Valley. And folks from the Ogden congregation and the Magic Valley congregation in southern Idaho will also be joining us. The book is called Mistakes and Miracles, and it's a case study of 5 congregations that committed themselves to anti-racism and multicultural work. We'd love for you to join us. Now, it's on Zoom. It starts this week on Wednesday. Unfortunately, the book is out of print. Great timing, right? They ran out, actually, is what happened. They ran out because so many people wanted to read it. So if you'd like to participate, send me an email, and I will connect you with the person at South Valley who's going to provide us with a photocopy of the first couple of chapters until we can get that book. So let me know if you'd like to join. Finally, tickets for Christmas Eve. Yes, we're going to do tickets. They are free, but it will help us to make sure that we've got enough room for everybody on what is sure to be a full service and a popular one. So they'll be available Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. You can get online on our website and reserve your free tickets through Eventbrite. Now, it's one of those Sundays, again. Our guest musician, Nicole Pinnell, is under the weather and could not bring her amazing cello music to us today. And our boiler, as you may know, is still testing positive for COVID or something. I don't know. Whatever boiler thing is going around. So 9 o'clock warmed it up as much as they could, but we're still chilly in here today. Listen, our administrator, Stephanie, is the one who has been dealing with this for weeks now. With all of the last-minute texts to the company to try to get them to get the boiler going, in addition to all the other things that she's carrying. So if you see her this week, will you just give her, buy her some coffee or send her an encouraging email, try not to break anything else. Let's give her some love this week because she's been through it. Now, the announcements are out of the way, and we can begin our service together. Let's begin with the chalice lighting today with these words by Patricia Sheldon. In this holy hour of stillness, we remind ourselves that the flames of life and love are never fully extinguished. In this hour of holy stillness, we offer ourselves for sharing the weight of each other's grief. In this hour of holy stillness, we offer the strength of our love to help others survive their pain and grief. In this hour of holy stillness, we call forth from each of us the power we offer out of life, out of loss, out of love. I invite you now to rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing together number 298.
We're going to do a change.
298 is the change, right?
Nope. Not then. We're going to do that then.
Okay.
We're going to do 159.
Oh! That is a change. I didn't know about that one. Okay, what is it?
159.
159.
You know this one. It's a classic.
One of my favorite authors, the great Rabbi Abraham Heschel, was once asked why he decided to get involved in the effort for peacemaking and civil rights. This was his reply: "There is immense silent agony in the world, and our task is to be a voice for the plundered poor, to prevent the desecration of the soul and the violation of our dream of honesty. The more deeply immersed I became in the thinking of the prophets, the more powerfully it became clear to me what the lives of the prophets sought to convey, that morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings, that indifference to evil is worse than evil itself, that in a free society, some are guilty but all are responsible. We are living in a time when anti-Semitism is not only on the rise, but is actually flourishing. The most recent former president of the United States had dinner with 2 outspoken anti-Semites last week, and it made news around the world. The more shocking headline to me, however, is the 61% rise in anti-Semitic speech on Twitter in the first 2 weeks after Elon Musk's acquisition of it. Bigots have been given a license to hate speech, and they've taken it. For many of us who are not Jewish, we may think that anti-Semitism is a relic of the past, or that it's confined to a weird but tiny subset of hateful people on the internet, or that it's the purview of religious extremists, but it's not. We also might think that it's too complicated to talk about, that we don't understand the nuances and complexities. It will take too long to learn. I'm as guilty of that as anyone. But as Rabbi Heschel says, if we want peace, it's our responsibility. We need to learn what anti-Semitism looks like, how to identify it, and how to speak up against it without qualification. I heard the other day on NPR that less than 150,000 Jews now live in Germany. There is no shortage of memorials to the Jews who were massacred during the Holocaust. They can be found on almost every corner in some places. But there is a shortage of Jews. Increasingly, Germans are memorializing a group of people who have themselves become a memory. That is, if people are even aware of a memory. A survey in 2020 discovered that almost half of Americans aged 18 to 39 could not name even one of the concentration camps where Jews were murdered during the Third Reich. And almost a quarter believed that the Holocaust was not real or had been overblown. If we do not take anti-Semitism seriously and learn how to talk about it, someone else will, and the message will not be sympathetic. The greatest evils require 3 parties, not 2. There is a victim and a perpetrator, but the greatest evils are also committed by the bystanders, the ones who know what is happening and fail to speak up. So for us to remember this evil is to refuse to be a bystander, even now, to say that it is not over, it is still happening. It is not a thing of the past. Violence against Jews has not ended, and we are all responsible for what happens next.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about my why and how I'm a steward of First Church. We have heard from many church stewards this fall, and just like their whys, mine is personal. I was born and grew up in East Berlin, in the part of the city in Mitte that was the seat of the East German government. I can't speak for all 17 million East Germans, but the way I experienced my childhood, there was no religion in East Germany. It was not talked about. My family didn't go to church because there was no church to go to. We weren't atheists per se, since that would have required some knowledge of religion in order to question it. But we had neither knowledge of nor the language to talk about religion and church. The many churches in Berlin and Germany, for me, they were like museums. I visited them to admire Gothic architecture, to be in awe of Renaissance art. Even after the wall came down and I grew older, I didn't really make the connection between the physical reality of places of faith and living, vibrant faith traditions. And by the time I was a history major in college, well, I thought I knew enough about religion not to trust it. It was in grad school in upstate New York, go Cornell, at a bar, we were in grad school, where I met my husband, Eric. The bar was hosting trivia night, which that evening was especially heavy on Bible questions. Eric accidentally joined my team of humanist skeptics, that was our name. And knowing the answer to every question about the New Testament, he helped us win that night. This was very curious to me. But my husband is from the Deep South, with parents who grew up in the Deep South and grandparents from the Deep South, including a grandfather who was a minister and who was never to find out that we had met at a bar. Eric attended church and religious education and Bible study all through his childhood and adolescence, and he's fluent in the language of Christianity. Our backgrounds were very different, but we were eager to bridge them. When we planned our life together, we agreed to find a religious, his word, or spiritual, mine, home for our future children. We got married in a non-denominational chapel at Cornell by a religious leader, on Eric's insistence, right after we had gotten married in town hall by a city official, my insistence. We spent the next several years faith and church shopping, first in Boston, then here. We would stay weeks, sometimes even months, with a church here and there, but I wasn't at ease on Sundays. There was always that moment in each sermon that triggered my fight or flight response. Out of respect, I went with a third option and froze. Our first child was born, then our second, and we weren't getting anywhere church-wise until we set foot in First Church. Eric and I found a place that welcomed and could accommodate both his mature religious identity and my state of uneasy questioning. We found our home, a home much like the one Nancy Moose described last week. For me, it feels just right to be here. Sermons ring true, words are followed by actions, people come as they are. The church challenges me to grow spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, and it does so without judgment. And I'm a more tolerant, a more grounded person because of it. So that is my why. As to the how, I still remember the volunteer who greeted us that very first time. He made me feel welcome, and the impact he had on my family inspired me to volunteer myself. And volunteering, well, that made me belong. I started as a coffee volunteer, then I joined the choir. As a newcomer, to me, both groups had looked like tough circles to break into, but all I had to do was to show up. In both groups, I found my people, including Becky Heel, who quickly got me involved in other things, the pledge committee among them. Tending to an infant, our third son, and then the pandemic put a pause on my participation in these groups, but I continued to pledge, and pledging is, of course, another really important way of how all of us are stewards of this church. This is my third year on the board of trustees, and we have an awesome board this year. We really do. I mentioned board service as another how, but I'd like to end with a why. Work on the board takes time and effort, a lot of both, but we get things done. And we get things done because we're in covenant, quote, in the spirit of respect and trust as we come together to support, nurture, and challenge each other to advance the mission and vision of our church. That is a mouthful, but we deliberately chose these words, and we speak them before every board meeting. Knowing that we mean them too is why I am a steward.
The offertory will now be gratefully accepted. If you would like to give online, you can just use one of these cards that way or cash in the plates. Thank you so much. In January of 1994, on his 55th birthday, Roshi Bernie Glassman led a retreat in Washington, D.C., focused on the questions of how to serve those rejected by society, those in poverty, and those with AIDS. His understanding of what it meant to live guided by Zen disciplines had been shifting for years, but he and his wife, Sensei Jishu Holmes, had been envisioning a container for people wanting to do spiritually based social engagement. At the end of this retreat, they decided to develop a religious order, the Zen Peacemaker Order, to respond to the questions, how do we bring our Zen into our lives, to see life as a practice field, where every aspect of our lives becomes practice? What forms can we create in modern society that will be conducive to seeing the oneness of life? What are the forms that will make it easier to experience interconnectedness? It's hard. We can admit that. 2 years later, they led their first bearing witness retreat on the sorting platform of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest mass murder in human history in a single site. I first heard of this retreat about 10 years ago from a Lakota friend who attended, and it has hovered on the edge of my consciousness all of these years, none of them quite right for one reason or another. But this year felt different. The political climate has shifted in our nation. All around us, we're seeing higher rates of violence, homelessness, income inequality, political malfeasance, be it gerrymandering or attempted coups. Sermons denouncing political misconduct have always been the bread and butter of Unitarian Universalist pulpits, but I don't think rhetoric is going to be enough in these coming years. Our churches must begin to leave the safety of our sanctuaries and bear witness to the suffering we see as a people wanting to do spiritually based social engagement. But where do we learn how to do this? Don Walton and I traveled to Poland, to Auschwitz, this November to sit the 27th Bearing Witness retreat in hopes of bringing back some ideas and some inspiration for our congregation. this was our experience.
It was 1967, the height of the Vietnam War, and the country was much more seriously split then than it is now. I was working for the CIA, which was heavily involved in the war. I myself was undecided about the war. When an opening in Saigon came up, I agreed to go to Vietnam in order to see for myself. I studied Vietnamese full-time for 6 months. In Vietnam, I lived with the locals for a while to improve my fluency. After 2.5 years there, I was convinced we were on the wrong side of that war. When I returned, I took active part in anti-war demonstrations in D.C. and the University of Maryland campus, where I was a part-time student, and I was tear-gassed on more than one occasion. I felt I was in a similar situation when Ian asked me if I was interested in the Auschwitz retreat. Now, that was just a few weeks before the projected red wave election, an election that would sweep into office people whose programs were much in common with the Nazis' rise to power. I hear of these same forces of demonization or patterns of demonization in our country today. And it's not just Mexicans, of course. It's the Muslims and trans people. It's the Jews again, and anybody different. Now, the issue for me was, could it happen here? I went on the retreat to see what effect such a trip would have, number one, on my meditation practice, and what influence it could have on my conduct dealing with the effects of the red wave election. The red wave did not materialize, but the threat of the MAGA base is still there. On my return, my meditation practice was disrupted, and it's only been in the last week that I've gotten it back on track. One form of my meditation is metta, sending loving kindness out to the world. But there in Auschwitz, as I stood between an open gas chamber here and a crematorium ovens over there, the evil idea of killing thousands every day just because you hate them overwhelmed that idea of loving kindness. Mm-hmm. With time, that evil idea has been rejected and vilified. But now, 75 years later, this hate has found fertile ground here in the U.S. Social justice is the heartbeat of this church. It very nearly happened here, and it's our moral obligation to join social or political movements to fight this rising evil.
Auschwitz is the name given to a complex that includes 3 main camps and some 40 subcamps. The Bearing Witness retreat lasted 5 days. 1 day at Auschwitz I, the Polish concentration camp, and 4 days at Auschwitz II, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the death camp. Between 1940 and 1945, 1.1 million people, roughly 950,000 Jews and 200,000 Poles, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roma, Soviet prisoners of war, and homosexuals were murdered in these camps. 1 in 6 Jews murdered in the Holocaust died at Auschwitz. Each morning we would walk the grounds of the camps in respectful silence, taking in the mounds of hair and shoes, the windowless barracks, the endless kilometers of electrified barbed wire, the remnants of massive warehouses of stolen property, the death wall, the gas chambers, the crematoriums. Each afternoon we sat meditation on the sorting platform between 2 train tracks. The same platform where Anne Frank, Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi walked. The same platform where Joseph Mengele stood, waving people towards labor, his laboratory, or the showers. No pictures were taken of those sent to the showers. They weren't even considered prisoners because they were dead within 50 minutes of stepping off that train. I cried more in these 5 days than I have all year. But it wasn't the scale of the camps or even some dramatic event that would cause me to break down. It was the minutiae that shifted me from overwhelmed to consequential. It was the trivial that transformed concepts into heartbreak. Each time I faced the remnants of the steps descending into yet another gas chamber, I wept. It was something about those simple 4 or 5 steps that dropped all the way into hell. It was the field of dead sunflowers that stood just outside the camp, or the trampoline in the backyard of the house I would pass as I would walk home, back to our refuge. Just normal life in the shadow of the biggest mass murder in a single site. There were kids laughing as they pushed each other down and then bounced back up. It was the story of the angry teen who turned away from his family in resentment when he was separated from them on the platform, so angry he didn't even say goodbye. He complained to another prisoner that they got to shower while he stood in his filth, only to learn the truth when the prisoner yelled at him. Could he not smell the air, acrid from burning human bodies? His family was already dead. It was the significance of the bowl. You were given one. It was your plate. At night, it was your toilet. You did not get to wash it. But if you lost it, you died because you were not given another. If they weren't sent to the showers, homosexuals were castrated, but not with a knife or even chemicals. Their testicles were boiled. A preposterous solution, but the camp seemed to inspire the SS to find the cruelest techniques whenever possible. Such is the path of the human heart when dehumanization is championed. Day after day, I walked the camp. It became familiar, as did a compression I felt in my heart. Wendell Berry writes, "There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places." And the desecration stood on my chest every day. How do you mourn so many? So many tortured, so many damaged, simply for the joy of causing damage.
The SS rounded up whole families and sent them off to the camps. Upon arriving, life and death decisions were made as families got off the trains. Healthy men and women were directed to the work barracks, men on the left side of the camp, women to the right side. The elderly, the sick, and those who could not work were sent to the gas chambers. But if healthy mothers were sent to the work barracks, herding their children to the gas chamber showers became utterly chaotic. The SS solution, mothers and their young children were always sent directly to the gas chambers. The final steps in this program were so horrific that even SS personnel could not bring themselves to do it. Instead, they selected Jewish prisoners, so-called Sonderkommandos, to do the unthinkable. In a friendly manner, Sonderkommandos would guide the group designated for execution to a building where they were told to disrobe completely for the showers before they could be processed. And put your belongings with your suitcase where you can retrieve them after the shower. Then they were directed into the gas chamber showers, and within minutes of closing and locking the doors, the prisoners would all be dead. The next Sando Commando duty was to open the chamber and start loading bodies into carts and haul them to the crematorium ovens located right next to the gas chamber. And their final duty was to go back into the gas chamber and clean up the vomit and defecation of those prisoners who suddenly realized their fate was imminent death. The gas chamber had to be ready for the next group of unwitting victims. Sando commanders were strictly isolated from the rest of the camp, and they held these jobs for only a month or so. The SS didn't want these individuals to be telling other prisoners what their ultimate fate would be. Then these Sando commanders became victims of the process themselves. What drew my interest to these Sando commandos was the moral choice they had to make. If they were selected for the job, they were told, "You can do this job or you'll be shot on the spot." This is what some call a choiceless choice. In choosing the job, they might have the opportunity to ameliorate the last few minutes of those headed into the gas chamber. If they refused the job, there were no possibilities after that. There is no moral choice in our lives to compare with what they had to decide.
On our first day in the camps, we learned about Father Kolbe, a Polish Catholic priest who'd been arrested by the Gestapo and brought to Auschwitz. In the early years, when people tried to escape, the Nazis would select 10 people from the offending barracks at random to be placed in starvation cells where they would slowly die. Following an escape attempt, one selected man began weeping and cried out for his wife and children. Father Kolbe stepped forward and offered his own life in exchange. After 2 weeks in the cell without food or water, Father Kolbe and the 3 other remaining men After 2 weeks in the cell without food or water, Father Kolbe and 3 other men remained alive. The guards, wanting to clear out the bodies, entered and injected them with carbolic acid. Polish people are proud of Father Kolbe. He is the lens through which all young Poles learn about the occupation of their nation. What it means to be Polish today is tied to this man because of his act of sacrifice. But the hagiography is not limited to Poland. Father Kolbe was canonized in 1982 by John Paul II, who offered him the unofficial title Martyr of Charity for emulating his God by willingly sacrificing his life for another. He is one of 10 20th century martyrs who are depicted in statues above the great west door of the Anglican Westminster Abbey in London. His feast day is August 14th, the day he was executed. And I suppose that part of me was proud when that it was a member of the clergy who had stepped forward when the moment came calling. It's truly a remarkable sacrifice. Like another hero, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I hoped that I might also possess this kind of courage if the moment came calling. So it was painful to learn more about Father Kolbe. A few days later, in one of the early morning council sessions, a process designed by the Zen peacemakers to keep us from becoming too overwhelmed by the retreat. 2 young Polish men shared their experience of growing up in the martyr's shadow as they were instructed on what it meant to be a good Catholic and a good Pole. Kolbe, always Kolbe. Only to learn as adults that the newspaper he ran prior to his arrest, Night of the Immaculata, often spread anti-Semitic propaganda, cited the protocols of the Elders of Zion, fabricated anti-Semitic texts from Russia, and spoke of international Jewish conspiracies. In the end, it was some of the very same ideologies he professed that motivated the Nazi machine and ultimately led to his death. What does it mean to be Polish, these men asked. They had to live in his shadow. They had to understand the occupation and their lives through the prism of Father Kolbe. Most people like to believe that if they faced the moment, they would oppose the Nazis, oppose fascism in general. But history and statistics tell us otherwise. Most people end up either supporting or acquiescing in the face of horror. And this is no different for the church. It's easy to look back on an event almost 80 years ago and believe that we would be part of a Tarantino film. But would we? We cannot wait for the big moment for us to face our test. Courage of this type is not found all at once. It is built up through years of smaller, courageous acts. Smaller acts help us learn that sacrifice has costs, but that integrity is worth more. We cannot wait until we are staring in the face of the unyielding moment to find courage, because history tells us that most of us will fail to act with integrity. If fighting fascism is our value, then we must begin now, or we won't be ready. The man Father Kolbe saved, Franciszek Givyovnicek, survived the camp. He died at 93, telling anyone who would listen about the heroic act of love of Maximilian Kolbe.
The German propaganda machine operated under the principle that a lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth. Many Germans were active supporters of the anti-Semitic program, but Hitler relied on the majority of Germans being passive and not objecting, as Jewish families were at first being harassed and then being removed to who knows where. Corporations often acted passively as well. On the first day of the retreat, we took a tour of the Auschwitz camp, which covered about 400 acres. There were over 100 barracks there, which could hold thousands of prisoners. And as we walked through the main gate, there were barbed wire fences 13 feet high that surrounded all the barracks. And there were structures inside the barbed wire that looked like lifeguard towers, only they were much larger and there was nowhere for a guard to sit or stand. And the tour guide said that these structures contained large containers of water to fight possible fires. The water towers were required by the insurance company that insured the camp. Some company executives would have had to draw up the policy, decide what would be covered and what would be excluded. That insurance company was Allianz, one of the largest insurance companies in the world today. And Allianz has said that their policies covered the barracks, the supply depots, and the motor pools of the SS. There is no evidence that their policies covered gas chambers or crematorium ovens. But there were many Jews killed in the concentration camps who had purchased life insurance policies from Allianz years before there were any indications of Hitler's final solution. And after the war was over, beneficiaries whose policies were stonewalled for years from collecting on those policies because Allianz insisted that before payment they had to produce the original policy and a death certificate. I have a policy with Allianz. It's a long-term care policy. It guarantees I won't be a burden to my family if I'm unable to take care of myself. Given the complicit role of Allianz in the war, what is my moral obligation? If I keep the policy, do I become complicit in this horrendous evil? Do I need to look beyond Allianz at the companies I buy from and the companies I invest in my 401k? Don't all of us need to do that kind of financial examination of conscience?
Trying to explain what it was like to sit this retreat, honestly, is an impossible act. I'm not sure Don or I even really know how to feel about what we experienced, even though a month has now passed. I suspect that we will be digesting this retreat for the rest of our lives. It was too much. But we did not do this retreat for ourselves. In so many ways, we did it for you. We sat the retreat so that we could bring the experience back. This was always our plan. Prior to leaving, a few people said to us, "I could never do something like that." But you can. It was hard, but we are here to tell you about it. And I think we're better men for it. And because life is interwoven, I think the church is better for it. Even though only 2 of us flew this time, it was actually the church that went. We sat the retreat not as individuals, but as members of this church. Now, I will not be here next year, and I don't know if Don will sit the retreat again. We've talked about it. We've talked about what it would be like to do that, and we've talked about what it would be like to bring more of you. We've talked about what it would be like to attend other bearing witness retreats. There's one in Alabama. There's one in the Black Hills on the Lakota reservation. The Zen peacemakers also lead something called street retreats, where people spend a week living on the streets, guided by a trained retreat leader. It's part of their formation as people wanting to lead lives of spiritually based social engagement. I don't know if returning to Auschwitz is the right thing for this church. It may be, it may not be. But given the homelessness issue in our city, a street retreat could be. It could be an amazing opportunity for members of this community to leave the knowing of the intellect and to embrace the not knowing of the spiritual journey. One of this year's retreatants, Sensei Joshin Burns, an acquaintance of mine and a leader of street retreats, has offered to come and lead a retreat here in the spring if members of this church are interested and willing. And I would like us to seriously consider this opportunity. In a similar way, Nan Seymour, sister of Todd Seymour, if you know him, will once again hold vigil on Antelope Island in honor of the Great Salt Lake while the legislature is in session. She will be bearing witness to the lake's destruction for the entire legislative session, which is over 40 days. I would like for us to put together a group of people willing to also sit vigil out there as well. Maybe not for the entire time, but for 1 or 2 days at a time. What would it be like to use your body to bear witness to the crimes that we are seeing, that we are witnessing happening against the environment? If not us, who? Truly. The path is clear. Without people willing to stand in the way, it will not be long before all that is left of the body of water that gives this city its name is a desiccated laterite and an arsenic cloud. Don and I went to Auschwitz not to see the camp, but to talk about how we might shift our culture here at First Church. So when the moment comes calling, we are ready. And final note before we close. Yesterday I saw a video of a group of Proud Boys who had come to protest a drag show at a church. And they'd come strapped with automatic rifles, weapons, whatever they call it. And it was in one of these states, I'm sort of having one of those pulpit brains where I forget the state, but it was one of these states like Ohio where they've stripped away the carry laws. They've stripped away the background checks. Anybody can just buy one of these now. And all the police could do was to stand there and ask them if they understood how to use their weapons safely. I cannot imagine what it was like for the people inside that church. That could be here. In fact, we should have more drag shows here, honestly. But it could be here. That happened this week in America. Source of life. God, my darling. Inspire us to take the love that we found here today, to warm our hearts, and to deny the coldness of culture. Warm our hearts so that we refuse to look away. That we seek out the worth and the dignity of every being. Awaken us to our great interdependence, where the actions in one part of the world truly shape everything. The interdependence beyond name and form and group and outcast, even birth and death, where we are all just resting in presence. And fill us with grace so that we might find the courage to begin to make these small acts of integrity essential as part of our lives as spiritual beings. So if and when the moment comes calling, we know how to act. Amen. I got so involved in myself. Yeah, who knows? How about we sing a hymn and then go into the postlude? Is that okay? Even though I already blew it out, is that all right? Let's do 298. Wake now my senses. It's a good one. It's with the sermon, it's with the theme. Golly. Someone needs help. Me. That someone is me. Thank you for joining us this morning. Service has ended. We have coffee out here. Moment of privilege. I went down with COVID 11 days. It was ugly. And I just want to say that, this is a very visible spot right here, but it is such a team, that makes things happen here. So when I went down, Tristan got me to record something, which then he wheeled in here, so you got to see a sermon, and he piped it out to the whole world, and people seemed to like it, which was great. But that was all Tristan managing it, and And then Monica stepped in to do the next sermon. And then our guest musician went down today. So all the music that you heard David play today, he started working on at 5 this morning. So, yeah. It is really, really a team. So, and I also want to thank Don Walton for writing with me, and Melanie Steiner-Sherwood, who hopped out because she was here for both services. She already heard the sermon earlier, and Monica, of course. So thank you all so much for coming. Please join us for coffee, and if any questions, we'll be out there. Come and join us.